My name is Kara, and I'm 33 years old. I live in a quiet little town called Marlow Creek, tucked between rolling hills and long-forgotten farmlands. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and gossip travels faster than the morning train. After my grandfather passed away 3 years ago, I inherited his old house, a creaky, two-story relic filled with dusty furniture, faded photographs, and more antiques than I could ever catalog. But out of everything, one thing stood out more than the rest: his old wooden radio. It sat in the corner of my living room, bulky and silent, with a cracked dial and a faint smell of varnish that reminded me of him. I'd dust it off every now and then, not because I used it, but because it felt wrong to ignore it. My grandfather used to tell me stories about that radio, how it once played messages from overseas, how it carried news that changed lives. I always thought it was just sentimental nonsense, something he exaggerated out of nostalgia. My friends didn't see it that way. Whenever they came over, they laughed at it. "Kara, that thing belongs in a museum," my coworker Lauren joked once, taking a selfie beside it like it was some kind of roadside attraction. Another friend, Jenna, said it looked haunted and refused to stay in the room with it. I'd laugh along to keep things light, but inside, I felt a quiet sting of embarrassment. It was one of the few things I had left from him. Yet everyone around me treated it like junk. Sometimes, I thought about getting rid of it. The house was already cluttered with old clocks, books, and tools that meant little to me. Maybe a garage sale would help me start fresh, a clean slate, free from the weight of the past. I even drafted a list of things to sell, and the radio was at the top. But every time I reached to unplug it and move it, something held me back. Maybe guilt, maybe intuition. One Friday evening, my coworkers stopped by after work for drinks. The conversation eventually drifted toward the museum corner, as they called it. Lauren picked up her glass and said, "Come on, Kara, you could probably get $100 for that thing. At least it'd pay for some real decor." They all laughed, and I tried to smile, but it hurt more than I wanted to admit. After they left, I sat in silence, staring at the radio across the room. It looked so ordinary, wood faded, dials rusted, one speaker half torn, and yet it had this quiet dignity about it, as if it had seen things no one else in the room could ever understand. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "This radio, Kara, has a soul. Don't ever lose it." Back then, I thought it was just his way of romanticizing an old hobby. But that night, something shifted. I decided I'd sell it in the morning. I even wrote a little "for sale" tag and left it on the coffee table. Then, almost absent-mindedly, I reached over and turned the dial just once, just to hear if it still worked. At first, only static filled the room, the kind of soft crackle that made me nostalgic. But then, faintly beneath the noise, a melody began to play. A song I'd never heard before, slow, haunting, and oddly beautiful. The sound didn't match any of the local stations, and no signal appeared on the dial. I frowned, twisting the knob again, but the song grew louder, clearer. My heart began to race. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of the tune, but just as suddenly as it had started, the song cut off. Silence filled the air, thick and heavy. Then, in that silence, a faint whisper floated through the speaker: my name. "Kara." I froze. The room felt colder somehow, and the only thing I could hear was my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I unplugged the radio in a panic, stumbling backward, but the whisper lingered for one more second before fading into nothing. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't normal. And deep down, I knew this old radio was far from ordinary. The song coming from the old radio wasn't on any station I could find, and it sent chills down my spine. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the unplugged radio. The faint echo of that whisper still lingered in my ears, like it was seared into the air around me. I checked the clock. It was almost midnight, and tried to calm myself down by telling myself it had to be a trick of my imagination. Maybe it was interference, or maybe the wiring was faulty and caused some weird playback glitch. But even as I said it out loud, The explanation didn't feel right. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the unplugged radio across the room. The morning light made it look harmless again, just an old relic gathering dust. Still, something about it unsettled me. I decided to test it once more. I plugged it back in, turned the dial slowly, and waited. All I heard was static, just a dull hiss. No song. No whisper. I felt silly for being afraid, yet the unease didn't fade. Later that day, I met my friend Jordan for lunch. She was the kind of person who laughed at everything, even ghosts. I told her about the strange song and the voice, expecting at least a sliver of curiosity. Instead, she laughed so loud the people at the next table turned to look. "Kara, you've been living alone too long in that old house," she teased, stirring her iced coffee. "That radio's just picking up some weird signal, probably an AM station from miles away." I tried to laugh with her, but deep down I wasn't convinced. The voice had sounded too real, too personal. I didn't tell her about the whisper saying my name. That part felt like mine alone. And admitting it out loud somehow made it scarier. That evening, as I sat on the couch reading, my mind kept drifting back to the radio. I thought about my grandfather and the strange way he'd guarded it all his life. He used to sit by it for hours, even when nothing played. I could almost picture him there now, the soft light of the lamp, his wrinkled hands resting on the dial. That secretive little smile on his face. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I fell asleep on the couch. I must have dozed off only a few minutes before I started dreaming. In the dream, I was standing in my grandfather's old workshop, the one behind the house. The air smelled of oil and wood shavings. He was sitting there, just as I remembered him, with the radio beside him glowing faintly. He looked up at me and smiled. "Don't let them take it, Kara," he said. His voice warm but urgent. "Keep it safe." I tried to ask him what he meant, but before I could speak, the glow from the radio grew brighter until everything turned white. I woke up gasping. The living room was dark again, and the clock showed 3:17 a.m. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the dream, but then something caught my attention. There was something under the radio. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. A small yellowed envelope was wedged beneath the base, so thin I could have sworn it hadn't been there before. I pulled it out carefully. It had my grandfather's neat handwriting on the front. My name. I froze, staring at the familiar looping letters. My hands trembled as I turned the envelope over. It was sealed, but barely. The paper looked old, older than I was. I hesitated, wondering if I should even open it. But curiosity won, and I gently tore the seal. Inside was a folded letter, brittle and faded. I unfolded it slowly, half expecting it to crumble. The first line made my stomach tighten. "If you are reading this, Kara, it means the time has come." My breath caught. The letter was dated 1948 decades before I was even born. And at the bottom of the page, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Whatever you do, never let anyone take the radio. It holds something far greater than sound." Inside the envelope was a letter written by my grandfather, dated decades before I was even born. I held that letter like it was something alive, fragile, and dangerous all at once. My hands shook as I read the words again and again, trying to make sense of them. The date at the top, March 12th, 1948, didn't make any sense. My grandfather would have been a teenager then, barely old enough to write a letter like this. And yet, I recognized his handwriting. Every curve of every letter was familiar. The letter mentioned a hidden gift inside the radio. My grandfather wrote that during the war, he had been involved in Project Echo, a secret government communications experiment. According to him, the radio wasn't an ordinary household item, it was a prototype built to transmit encrypted signals that couldn't be traced. He warned that the device should never be tampered with, or it could fall into the wrong hands. My skin prickled as I finished reading. What could possibly be inside it? It was just an old wooden box with knobs and static. Still, something deep in me whispered that I shouldn't ignore it. I folded the letter back up and slid it into my journal. The next morning, I called the only person I knew who might understand antiques, Mr. Whitmore, the owner of a local antique shop. He was an older man, quiet and polite, who had once helped me identify a few vintage books. When I told him about the radio and the letter, there was a long pause on the phone before he spoke. "Bring it in, Miss Kara," he said finally. "But be careful. Don't try to open it yourself." When I arrived at his shop, he was already waiting with his magnifying glasses and white gloves. His shop smelled of old paper and varnish, and shelves of trinkets surrounded us. I carefully placed the radio on the counter. He examined it slowly, his expression growing more serious by the second. "This isn't just an old receiver," he murmured. "It's pre-war craftsmanship, maybe even experimental. See these markings here?" He pointed to faint symbols etched into the back panel, small, deliberate carvings I'd never noticed before. This was made for coded transmissions, possibly military intelligence. A chill ran down my spine. So, my grandfather was telling the truth? Mr. Whitmore nodded slightly. "It appears so. These were never meant for civilian hands. There are collectors who'd pay a fortune for something like this, especially if it still works." His words echoed in my head. Collectors. Fortune. Secrets. I told him about the strange song and the voice whispering my name. For a moment, his eyes flickered with something like fear. "You heard it?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Then you should keep it hidden. There are people who've been looking for devices like this for years. They don't care about history, they care about what's inside." I frowned. "What's inside?" "I don't know," he said. "But if that radio truly has a signal or recording embedded in it, it could hold information that was never meant to be found." The way he said it sent a shiver through me. He carefully wrapped the radio in cloth and handed it back. "Lock it up, and don't tell anyone else about it." I left the shop uneasy. His warning felt melodramatic, but the tone in his voice was deadly serious. I decided to follow his advice and keep the radio hidden in my house. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying his words. Who would want an old radio badly enough to steal or harm someone for it? I was about to drift off to sleep when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Do not trust him." I sat up instantly, my heart pounding. No name, no explanation, just those 4 words. And as I looked toward the living room, I could have sworn I saw the faintest glow coming from the radio's dial. I didn't believe his warning until a stranger knocked on my door that same night asking to buy the radio. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The unknown text, the glow from the radio's dial, the eerie silence that seemed to fill the house, it all felt like something out of a bad movie. I kept telling myself that I was tired, stressed, and reading too much into things. But deep down, I couldn't shake the growing feeling that something was wrong. I sat on the couch, staring at the radio from across the room. It looked harmless in the low light, a silent relic that shouldn't have been capable of causing fear. I debated unplugging it and locking it away like Mr. Whitmore told me to. Before I could move, there was a sudden knock at the door. Sharp, deliberate, and too loud for that hour. I froze. Who would be visiting me at nearly midnight? I hesitated, then peeked through the curtain. A man stood on my porch, tall, in a dark coat, with his hands tucked into his pockets. His face was hard to see in the dim porch light, but he looked calm, almost too calm. I cracked the door open just an inch. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound steady. He smiled politely. "Sorry to bother you this late," he said in a soft voice. "My name's Simon. I'm a collector of vintage electronics, and I heard you might have an old radio for sale." My stomach dropped. How could he possibly know that? I hadn't posted anything online, hadn't told anyone else about it besides Mr. Whitmore and Jordan, and neither of them would have said a word. I forced a polite laugh. You must have the wrong house. Simon's smile didn't fade. I don't think I do, he said quietly. It's a very specific model. I'd be willing to pay $500 for it, cash. 500. For something everyone else thought was worthless. The number made me hesitate, but the unease crawling up my spine was stronger. It's not for sale, I said firmly. His expression shifted slightly, the polite collector's charm slipping into something colder. I understand, he said after a moment, though his voice carried an edge now. If you change your mind, here's my card. He slid a small white card through the gap in the door. I took it. More out of reflex than trust. The card was blank except for his name, Simon Vale, and a phone number. No business name, no website, nothing else. Good night, I said quickly, closing the door. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to his footsteps fade away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump: the creak of the floorboards, the wind against the windows, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Around 2 a.m., I got up to check the locks again. The house felt different, heavy. Like the air itself was charged with tension. When I finally walked toward the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. The radio was on. Soft static filled the air. The dial glowed faintly even though I hadn't touched it since earlier that day. I swallowed hard, stepping closer. The static rose and fell like a breathing sound, a pattern, almost rhythmic. Then, beneath the static, I heard it again, the same haunting song. But this time, it was softer, more deliberate. The melody repeated 3 times, then cut off. I turned to grab my phone and record it, but as soon as I did, the music stopped. The dial flickered once, then went completely dark. I stood there in silence, the only light now coming from the moon outside. My hands trembled as I picked up Simon's card from the table. And that's when I noticed something new. Faint numbers had appeared on the back, handwritten in pencil. Coordinates. Before I could even process what I was looking at, a sudden crash echoed outside, the sound of glass breaking. I ran to the window. The back of Mr. Whitmore's antique shop, just visible from my yard, was dark except for one broken window glinting in the moonlight. Mr. Whitmore's shop had been broken into and the police said he'd been taken to the hospital. The moment I saw that shattered window, a cold wave of panic ran through me. Mr. Whitmore's shop was only a few blocks away, and even though it was late, I didn't think twice. I grabbed my keys and drove over. My hands trembling so badly I almost dropped them. The streets were empty, the kind of eerie quiet that makes every shadow feel alive. When I arrived, flashing red and blue lights lit up the old storefront. 2 police cars were parked out front, and yellow tape stretched across the door. My stomach twisted as I stepped out of the car. A police officer noticed me and held up his hand. Sorry, miss, this area's closed, he said. I know the owner, I said quickly. Mr. Whitmore, is he okay? The officer's expression softened slightly. He's at Marlow General Hospital. Someone broke in and attacked him, but he's stable. My heart sank. Do you know who did it? He shook his head. We're still investigating, but it looks like they didn't take much, just smashed some cases. Oddly specific, like they were looking for something. Something. I didn't need to ask what. I thanked the officer and drove straight to the hospital. When I got there, I found Mr. Whitmore in a small, dimly lit room. He was sitting up in bed, his arm in a sling, his face bruised but alert. When he saw me, his eyes widened slightly, and he motioned for me to close the door. I was afraid you'd come, he said hoarsely. What happened? I whispered, pulling a chair beside his bed. He looked around the room before answering. A man came in just before closing, said he was interested in a radio prototype. I told him I didn't have anything like that. Then he said your name. I froze. He said my name? Yes. Then he demanded I tell him where the device was. I tried to play dumb, but he knew too much about the letter. The markings, even your Howe, grandfather's name. Simon, I murmured. Mr. Whitmore nodded grimly. That must be him. He wasn't after money. He wanted the radio itself. A chill crawled down my spine. He didn't get it, I said quickly. I have it hidden in my basement. Good, he whispered. Keep it that way. Don't trust anyone, Kara. He's not a collector. He's a hunter, and that thing you have, it's more valuable than either of us realized. He leaned forward, lowering his voice even more. Whatever is inside that radio, your grandfather died protecting it. My throat tightened. What are you saying? He sighed, his eyes tired. Your grandfather wasn't just an engineer. He was part of a team working on an encryption system, a technology decades ahead of its time. But when the government shut the project down, he disappeared from public work. I think he hid a piece of it in that radio. I sat there in stunned silence. Suddenly, my grandfather's warnings made a terrifying kind of sense. Before I could respond, a nurse entered, gently urging me to let him rest. I squeezed his hand and promised I'd check on him soon. When I got home, the air in the house felt heavier than usual. I went straight to the basement and made sure the radio was still there, wrapped in old blankets and locked in a storage cabinet. Everything seemed fine, at least for the moment. I turned to leave, but just as my hand touched the doorknob, a low hum filled the air. I froze. The sound was coming from the cabinet. The radio was vibrating slightly, a soft blue light pulsing behind the speaker grill. I knew it wasn't plugged in. I'd made sure of that days ago. Then, through the faint hum, came a series of short, sharp beeps, not random noise, a pattern. I pulled out my phone, recording the sound as my grandfather's letter flashed in my mind. It holds something far greater than sound. The beeps continued for nearly a minute before stopping, abruptly, leaving a thick silence behind. My phone's recording timer stopped at exactly 0:43. I didn't know what the numbers meant, but deep down, I knew they weren't just noise. Someone or something was trying to send me a message. When I played the recording for a friend in cybersecurity, her face turned pale. By the next morning, I hadn't slept a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those beeps replaying in my head, steady, deliberate, like some hidden code demanding to be understood. I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I needed someone who could make sense of it, someone who understood things like frequencies and signals. That's when I thought of Amelia. Amelia and I had gone to college together. She now worked in cybersecurity for a private tech firm, one of those people who could read binary like a second language. I called her and asked if she could meet me for coffee, hinting that I'd found something strange. When we met later that morning, I could tell by the look on her face that she thought I was being dramatic. Okay, Kara, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. Let's hear it. I handed her my phone and played the recording. At first, she just listened casually, her brow slightly furrowed. But as the pattern of beeps went on, her expression shifted. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, lowering the volume slightly like she didn't want others to hear. Where did you get this? She asked quietly. I hesitated. From an old radio my grandfather left me. It played it on its own. Amelia frowned. That's not random noise, that's Morse code, an old military variant. My pulse quickened. What does it say? She pulled a notepad from her bag and started jotting down the dots and dashes as she replayed the audio. Her pen moved fast, her face growing paler by the second. Finally, she set the pen down. It's incomplete, but this part reads, Echo 72 newtons, 19W keep, secure. Echo, I whispered. My grandfather mentioned something called Project Echo. Amelia looked up sharply. Kara, where exactly did you find this radio? In his old house. He left a letter, he said it was important, that it had to stay hidden. She sighed, closing her notebook. Then you need to destroy it. What? I'm serious, she said. If this really came from a classified project, even one that old, it could be dangerous. People collect war relics like that for more than history, sometimes for power. You have no idea who might be looking for it. I thought of Simon, his pale smile, and the break-in at Mr. Whitmore's shop. Someone already is, I admitted softly, and I think they hurt him. That made her expression darken. Then, You need to be careful. This isn't just a hobbyist's obsession. If someone's willing to attack an old man for it, they know what it's worth. I wanted to take her advice, to walk away, but something inside me resisted. No, I said firmly. My grandfather protected it for a reason. I'm not going to destroy it before I know what's inside. Amelia stared at me for a long moment, then sighed in frustration. You always were stubborn. Fine. I'll run the recording through a filter and see if there's more hidden beneath the sound. She sent me home while she worked on it. The day dragged endlessly as I tried to distract myself with chores, but I couldn't stop glancing toward the basement door. When my phone finally buzzed that evening, Kara, you're not going to believe this, there's a second layer of data under the audio. It's like a transmission overlay. I'm still decoding it, but part of it looks like coordinates, and a date. A date? I repeated. Yes, she said. February 3rd, 1949. The line went quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, whatever this is, your grandfather didn't just build a radio. He built something meant to be found by someone who could follow his trail. Before I could respond, I heard a faint noise from the basement, a creak, then a soft thud, like something being moved. I froze. Amelia! I think someone's in my house. Get out! She hissed. I grabbed my keys and phone, heart hammering, and sprinted toward the back door. When I glanced down the basement stairs, I caught a glimpse of motion, the cabinet door hanging open. The radio was gone. My heart sank when I saw the empty spot where the radio used to sit. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind went blank, my body frozen as the reality of it hit me. Someone had been inside my house. The blankets I'd wrapped around the radio were tossed aside, the cabinet door swinging slightly on its hinges. I backed away slowly, my breath shaking, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. When the dispatcher answered, I stumbled through my words, explaining the break-in and the missing antique. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up outside, their lights cutting through the darkness of my backyard. The officers searched the house, but there were no signs of forced entry. Every window was locked, every door untouched. It was as if the thief had just appeared and disappeared without a trace. Anything else missing? One of them asked. I shook my head. Just the radio. The younger officer exchanged a look with his partner. A radio? He repeated, almost amused. I didn't bother explaining. How could I tell them it wasn't just a radio, that it was part of a decades-old secret project connected to a dead man and a mysterious stranger? They'd think I was delusional. After the police left, the house felt emptier than ever. I sat on the basement steps, staring at the vacant spot where the radio once stood. A hollow ache settled in my chest, grief, anger, fear, all tangled together. My grandfather had trusted me to protect it, and now it was gone. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Whitmore. He's looking for you. Be careful. I called him immediately, my heart pounding. He answered on the second ring, his voice weak but urgent. Kara, listen to me. There's a man, Simon, I think. He's not working alone. I've been hearing rumors for years about private collectors who buy classified relics on the black market. They call it the Silent Archive. They'll pay millions for anything connected to Project Echo. I swallowed hard. How do I find them? You don't, he said firmly. You stay away from them. But I couldn't. Not when that radio was the last piece of my grandfather's life and the only clue to what he was hiding. After I hung up, I sat in silence, trying to think. That's when I remembered something Amelia had mentioned, the coordinates embedded in the code. I grabbed my laptop and typed them into a map. The location that popped up made my blood run cold. It was only 2 hours away. A city called Crestwood, and according to a quick search, an auction was scheduled there in 2 days. Private historical artifacts sale. Invitation only. Scrolling through the preview listings, my eyes stopped at one in particular. World War II prototype communication device, unknown origin. The picture was grainy, but I didn't need a clearer image to recognize it. The wood grain, the cracked dial, the faint etching on the side, it was my grandfather's radio. My stomach flipped. It hadn't even been 24 hours since it disappeared, and someone had already prepared to sell it. I sent the link to Amelia with a single message. I found it. She called instantly. Kara, don't you dare go there. If it's connected to the silent archive, they won't let you walk out easily. I have to, I said, pacing the room. That radio isn't just a collectible, it's part of something my grandfather wanted me to find. I need to finish what he started. She was silent for a long time, then sighed. If you're going, you're not going alone. I'll track the listing and call the local police if anything happens. That gave me a little comfort, though not much. I spent the rest of the night packing a small bag, flashlight, phone charger, pepper spray, the original letter from my grandfather, and before dawn, I was on the road. The early morning fog clung to the highway like a warning. Every car that passed made me tense. Every shadow on the roadside made my stomach twist. Halfway to Crestwood, I checked my rearview mirror and my blood ran cold. A black sedan was following me. Its headlights never wavered, staying perfectly aligned with my car. And somehow, I already knew who was inside. Halfway through the drive, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, too close and too constant. At first, I thought it was just another car on the same stretch of highway. The fog had thinned out, leaving the night sky dim and cloudless. The road ahead was empty, stretching endlessly between the trees. But after a few minutes, I noticed something strange. The car behind me kept the exact same distance. No matter how much I slowed down or sped up, those headlights stayed perfectly aligned with my taillights. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe the driver was just cautious or lost. But when I took an unexpected turn off the main road, the sedan followed. That's when my pulse started to race. I pulled out my phone and called Amelia. She answered on the second ring. Hey, where are you now? She asked. Still about an hour from Crestwood, I said, my voice shaking. But I think someone's following me. Are you sure? Yes, I hissed. They've been behind me for at least 20 miles. I took a random exit, and they took the same one. There was a pause, then Amelia's voice grew sharper. Kara, listen to me. Get somewhere public, a gas station, a diner, anywhere with cameras. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Okay, I spotted a faded sign for a 24-hour gas station a few miles ahead. The car was still behind me, its lights unwavering. I pulled into the gas station, parking near the convenience store entrance. The sedan slowed down as it passed and then kept going. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by unease. Why follow me for miles only to drive off now? I stayed inside my car for a few minutes, watching the road. No cars, no movement, just silence and the soft hum of the gas pumps. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights felt too bright. I grabbed a coffee just to give myself something to do. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager, barely glanced up. Long drive? He muttered. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Heading to an auction in Crestwood. He raised an eyebrow. At this hour? I shrugged. Long story. When I stepped back outside, I felt that prickling sensation again, the one that told me I wasn't alone. I looked around, scanning the parking lot, but everything seemed normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. I got back in the car and pulled onto the road again. The rest of the drive was quiet, too quiet. When I finally saw the glowing city lights of Crestwood ahead, I exhaled in relief. But the comfort didn't last long. The auction mansion sat on the edge of town, a sprawling estate surrounded by tall iron gates. The invitation-only event was supposed to be for private collectors, and from what I could see through the entrance, luxury cars lined the driveway. The kind of place where secrets were sold with a glass of champagne. I parked down the hill, hidden behind a row of trees. If I walked through the front gate, I'd be turned away instantly. So I circled around the property until I found a smaller side entrance meant for catering staff. The guard at the side door was distracted, checking his phone, and I slipped through while he wasn't looking. Inside, the mansion was buzzing with quiet conversation and clinking glasses. The air smelled of perfume and money. Every table displayed some artifact, old weapons, manuscripts, jewelry, and technology from another age. Then I saw it. On a velvet-covered pedestal beneath a glass dome sat my grandfather's radio. The wooden casing had been polished, the crack on the dial cleaned. A small gold card beside it read, "Lot Hashonanin World War II Experimental Communication Device." My throat went dry. I stepped closer, every instinct screaming that I shouldn't be there. Then, just as I reached the display, a hand landed firmly on my shoulder. I froze. A low voice whispered in my ear, smooth and cold. "You shouldn't have come here, Kara." I turned slowly, and my worst fear was confirmed. It was Simon. His polite smile was gone, replaced by something far darker. And in that moment, I realized the real auction that night wasn't about antiques. It was about power, and I had walked straight into their hands. The voice belonged to Simon, but now he wasn't pretending to be friendly. He tightened his grip on my shoulder, guiding me away from the display like we were two old friends sharing a private moment. But the tension in his fingers told another story. His tone was smooth, almost casual, yet every word dripped with quiet threat. "You've been busy," he said, steering me toward a hallway off the main auction floor. "Following coordinates, decoding messages, calling your tech friend. You're not as subtle as you think, Kara." I tried to pull away, but his grip only tightened. "What do you want from me?" He smirked. "Want? I already have what I came for. But you made things complicated." We stopped in a narrow corridor lined with portraits. The faint hum of voices from the auction room carried through the first aid walls. Simon turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "That radio," he said quietly, "wasn't just some wartime relic. It was a prototype, one of 12 created for a covert intelligence experiment. Your grandfather wasn't just an engineer. He helped design a system that could intercept and decrypt transmissions in real time. Do you understand how valuable that is? Even now?" I shook my head. "You're saying it still works?" "Oh, it works," he said with a grin. "The code you found was only part of it. The real data, the encryption key, is buried inside the circuitry. And whoever holds that key can access the archives from Project Echo. Decades of classified communication logs. Governments would kill for it." My stomach churned. "Then why me? Why follow me?" threatened Whitmore. "Because your grandfather made it personal," he cut in. "He locked the final piece behind a failsafe. The signal can only be activated using his genetic sequence or that of a direct descendant." The words hit me like a punch. "You mean, yes," he said softly. "You, Kara, you're the key." For a moment, the room seemed to spin. I couldn't tell if he was bluffing or if my grandfather had truly left me at the center of something bigger than I could comprehend. Simon reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek black device. "You'll help me retrieve the data," he said simply. "Once I have it, I'll pay you handsomely and you can go back to your quiet little life." "I'll never help you," I snapped. He sighed, shaking his head as if disappointed. "You really should have taken the offer when it was money on the table." He pressed a button on his earpiece, and 2 men in dark suits appeared at the end of the hallway. Panic surged through me. I backed up, glancing toward the nearest door, a service corridor leading toward the back of the mansion. Before Simon could react, I bolted. I heard his voice echo behind me. "Don't let her out of the house." My heels pounded against the marble as I sprinted through the corridor. I burst into a kitchen bustling with staff and darted past them, ignoring their shouts. The back exit loomed ahead, but before I could reach it, strong hands grabbed my arm. I struggled, twisting violently until I broke free and shoved open the door. Cold air hit my face as I stumbled into the courtyard. I didn't stop running until I reached the outer gates. My lungs burned, my legs screaming in protest. I looked back, the mansion glowed in the distance, figures moving behind the windows. Somewhere inside, Simon still had my grandfather's radio. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Whitmore. "Where are you?" he asked urgently. "At the auction," I gasped. "He's got it, Whitmore. He has the radio." "Listen to me," he said, his voice sharp. "The police are on their way. One of my contacts tipped them off about illegal artifacts being sold there. You need to stay hidden until they arrive." I crouched behind a hedge near the gate, watching as sirens wailed in the distance. Within minutes, flashing lights illuminated the night, and officers swarmed the mansion. From my hiding spot, I saw Simon watching the chaos unfold. He turned once and smiled directly toward where I hid before slipping out a side door with something tucked under his arm. My heart sank. Even as the police shut down the auction and escorted people out in handcuffs, one truth became painfully clear. Simon was gone. And so was the radio. The auction was shut down, but the radio had vanished into thin air. By the time the police let me leave, the mansion looked like a crime scene. Officers were hauling boxes of confiscated items into vans, their radios crackling with chatter about illegal trading and missing prototypes. The guests who had once been sipping champagne were now lined up for questioning under the harsh glow of police floodlights. But even with all that commotion, I couldn't stop scanning the crowd for one thing: the glint of that polished wood, the faint hum of my grandfather's radio. It wasn't there. Neither was Simon. An officer asked for my statement, but I kept my answers vague. I didn't mention Project Echo, the code, or my grandfather's involvement. I just said that a stolen family heirloom had shown up in the auction and that the man who took it had escaped. The officer took notes without looking at me, clearly too busy to care about one missing radio in the middle of a massive bust. When I finally stepped out into the night, the air was cold and heavy. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm the storm in my chest. Simon had outsmarted me again. Every time I got close, he was one step ahead. And now, he had the only remaining proof of my grandfather's secret. I drove back to Marlow Creek before sunrise. The sky pale and empty. My house felt hollow when I walked in, as if even the air knew something was missing. I collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion pulling at me, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Why was Simon still after me if he already had the radio? What else did he need? A few hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Whitmore. "Come by when you can. I found something you need to see." I didn't even change clothes. I drove straight to his shop, now boarded up from the break-in. Inside, the place was a mess, glass still on the floor, shelves half empty, but on the counter sat a stack of documents, bound together by a fraying string. Mr. Whitmore, still bruised but determined, gestured for me to sit. "These were hidden behind one of my storage drawers," he said quietly. "Old government blueprints, part of a collection I bought years ago. I never paid much attention to them until I saw what was stamped on the corner." He turned the top page toward me. My breath caught when I saw the faint, black ink in the corner. Project Echo Confidential. The diagram was detailed, a schematic of some kind of communication device. As my eyes scanned the page, recognition struck me like lightning. The drawing looked exactly like my grandfather's radio, every dial, every groove, every marking in the same place. But there was something else. Something even more startling. Scribbled in faded pencil across the margin were notes in my grandfather's handwriting. "This is his," I whispered. "These are his notes." Mr. Whitmore nodded. "Look at the signature block. The initials at the bottom, R.H. Your grandfather's name was Robert Hayes, wasn't it?" I nodded slowly, tracing the letters with my finger. Then he flipped to another page. This one contained a technical description: Echo Receiver Model 12. Capable of encrypted multiband transmission. Prototype self-contained data storage within harmonic frequency patterns. My heart skipped a beat. Data storage within frequency patterns. I read aloud. That's what the song was. It wasn't just music. It was information. Mr. Whitmore's expression grew grim. Exactly. Your grandfather didn't just build a radio, he hid something inside the signal itself. A wave of awe and dread rolled through me. If that was true, then Simon wasn't after the radio, he was after whatever was hidden inside that sound. When I got home, I dug out my phone and replayed the recording of the beeps and melody. It filled the room again, haunting, hollow, and yet deliberate. I forwarded the file to Amelia and told her everything. A few hours later she called back, her voice trembling. Kara, I decoded part of it. It's binary data, the pattern translates into a sequence that looks like a bank code, but it's encrypted under your grandfather's name, and it's active. Active? I repeated. Yes, she said. It's connected to an existing account. A foundation, actually. The Hayes Preservation Trust. And Kara, there's money in it. A lot of money. I stared at my reflection in the dark phone screen, my pulse racing. How much? Over $2 million, she whispered, and the note attached to it says, for restoration of truth. The words sent a chill down my spine. For the first time, I began to understand the radio wasn't just a secret, it was a message from the past. A message my grandfather had left for me to finish. The account wasn't empty, it held a fortune left behind for whoever solved the code. When Amelia told me about the money, I didn't believe her at first. $2 million sitting untouched for decades under my grandfather's name? It sounded impossible. But when she sent me the verification documents, there it was in black and white, the Hayes Preservation Trust, registered in 1950, with an active balance of $2,438,000. The listed purpose was vague, for restoration of truth. I stared at those words over and over again, my hands trembling. My grandfather, the quiet man who built radios in his shed and collected war memorabilia, had created a trust with a message hidden inside a melody, and somehow, after all these years, it had reached me. Amelia met me at my house that afternoon, a laptop in hand and a nervous look on her face. This isn't just about money, Kara, she said, sitting at my kitchen table. The data embedded in that melody, I think it's connected to government files. The encryption patterns are similar to classified archives from the late 42nds. I ran a few simulations, and whatever's in there was meant to expose something. I frowned. Expose what? She hesitated. Corruption. The documents mention internal communications between defense contractors, information that might have been buried. Your grandfather must have discovered something back then and used the radio to encode the evidence. The room fell silent. I tried to imagine him young, brilliant, loyal, working on a secret project during wartime, only to realize he was building something dangerous. Maybe the trust was his way of ensuring the truth would survive long after he was gone. Amelia scrolled through lines of decoded text on her laptop. If this is right, your grandfather was trying to send a message to someone outside the project. But when they shut it down, he hid everything in that radio instead. I leaned back, still trying to process it all. So this money? It's supposed to fund whatever he couldn't finish. She nodded. And I think that's why he left you the clues. You were never supposed to sell the radio, you were meant to uncover what he started. For the first time in weeks, I felt clarity. The fear, the chaos, the constant running, it all began to make sense. My grandfather wasn't just protecting a secret, he was passing on a responsibility. That evening, I visited Mr. Whitmore again. He was still recovering but alert enough to listen as I explained what Amelia and I had discovered. His eyes filled with pride and relief. Robert was always a step ahead, he said quietly. He once told me that truth has a longer life than lies, even if it has to sleep for a while. Maybe he knew you'd be the one to wake it. Those words stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, Amelia helped me access the trust legally through inheritance verification. When the documents cleared, the funds were officially transferred into my name, not as personal wealth, but as the director of the Hayes Foundation for Historical Transparency. I decided to use every cent of it to preserve and publish the hidden files, to bring my grandfather's findings to light. News of the discovery spread quickly once Amelia helped me decode the remaining data. Reporters started calling, historians wanted interviews, and several universities reached out, offering to help authenticate the research. My once quiet life had become a whirlwind of attention and curiosity. Still, not all of it felt safe. A few anonymous emails warned me to stop digging, claiming that some secrets are meant to stay buried. I ignored them, but the unease never fully left me. Then one morning, as I prepared to meet a journalist, I found a small package on my doorstep unmarked, with no return address. Inside, nestled in a layer of old newspaper, was my grandfather's silver pen, the same one he used to write every note and design every schematic. And underneath it lay a handwritten note in familiar, neat cursive. "You've done well, Kara. The truth is awake now. Keep it safe." I sat on the porch holding that note, tears streaming down my face. Somehow, even beyond the grave, my grandfather was still guiding me. But as I looked closer at the packaging, I noticed faint residue of something black oil, maybe grease, like it had been handled by someone who worked with machines, someone who was still watching. And before I could even process that, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. The subject line read, "The radio isn't finished." Inside the package was the radio, and it was turned on. The email subject line had frozen me in place. "The radio isn't finished." I stared at it for several minutes, unable to decide if I should open it or delete it. My gut screamed that it was a trap, another mind game from Simon or whoever he worked for. But curiosity, the same dangerous instinct that had kept me chasing this mystery, wouldn't let me ignore it. Before I could even click, a faint hum echoed through the house. At first, I thought it was my refrigerator cycling on until I realized the sound was coming from the porch. Slowly, cautiously, I opened the front door. There it was. My grandfather's radio. It sat neatly on the doormat, wrapped in brown paper that had been carefully sliced open down the middle, as though someone had wanted me to see it the instant I stepped outside. The cord trailed off to the side, unplugged, yet the dial glowed softly with that familiar blue light. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The last time I'd seen it, Simon was carrying it out of the mansion under his arm. And now, here it was returned, humming like it had never been gone. I backed up into the living room, my heart pounding, and called Amelia immediately. "It's back," I whispered. "What do you mean it's back?" "The radio, it's on my porch. It's on, Amelia. It's glowing." There was a pause. Then her voice hardened. "Don't touch it. I'm coming over." But even before she could hang up, the faint hum shifted. The static changed into a familiar, low melody, the same haunting tune I'd heard that first night. It filled the air, softer than before, almost gentle, like a lullaby. I found myself drawn to it, unable to resist. Slowly, I approached and crouched beside it. The music played for nearly a minute before fading out. Then, through the quiet crackle, came a voice. My breath caught in my throat. It was his voice. "Kara," my grandfather said, calm, warm, unmistakable. "You've done it. You've kept it safe." Tears welled in my eyes. "Grandpa?" I whispered, even though I knew I wouldn't get a reply. The voice continued. "If you're hearing this, it means the work is complete. Project Echo's truth has been restored. The system you've unlocked was designed to reveal what they tried to bury. But know this, the device you hold is not a weapon. It's a mirror. It shows those who listen what they've chosen to forget." The transmission crackled again, his voice growing fainter. "The rest is up to you now, Kara. You've already heard the song. You'll understand what it means when the world does too." Then the light faded, and the radio fell silent. I sat there for a long time, sobbing quietly. The kind of tears that come from equal parts grief and peace. My grandfather had known all along that someone would eventually try to silence his discovery, and he had trusted me to outlast them. By the time Amelia arrived, I had composed myself. She examined the radio carefully, her brows knitted. "It's not transmitting anymore," she said. "Whatever signal was active, it's gone now, almost like it completed a loop." I nodded. "It was him. I heard him, Amelia." She didn't argue. She just placed a hand on my shoulder, her expression softening. Then I guess he got to say goodbye. Over the next few days, the story of the Hayes transmission spread everywhere. News outlets picked up the report, historians verified the documents, and the foundation gained national attention. My coworkers, the same ones who once mocked my haunted museum house, now treated me like I'd unearthed buried treasure. But fame wasn't what I cared about. Every time I looked at that radio, I felt like my grandfather was still there, guiding me, protecting me. A week later, I placed the radio in a glass display case at the Foundation's new headquarters. The small plaque beneath it read, "The Hayes Echo Receiver, a Legacy of Truth." For the first time in months, I finally slept peacefully. Until the next morning, another email arrived. The sender's name made my heart stop cold. From Simon Vale. Subject: I can offer you $10 million for the radio. $10 million for something they once called junk. When I saw Simon's name in my inbox again, my entire body tensed. For a moment, I just stared at the message, half expecting it to vanish, like some phantom resurfacing from a bad dream. The email was short and to the point. I can offer you $10 million for the radio. No questions asked. Cash or transfer your choice. $10 million. The number almost made me laugh. It was surreal, an absurd price. For something people once mocked. Something I'd nearly sold for pocket change at a garage sale. But beneath the staggering offer was something colder. Darker. Simon wasn't done. I forwarded the message to Amelia right away. Within minutes, she called me, her tone sharp with concern. "You're not seriously considering this, right?" "Of course not," I said quickly. "But I want to know where it came from." "That's the thing," she replied. "I traced the IP. It's been rerouted through half a dozen proxy servers. But the origin points to Zurich, an encrypted channel linked to a private defense contractor. Kara, this isn't just Simon acting alone anymore. He's working with people who have serious resources." The air seemed to thicken around me. "So they're still after it. They always will be," she said quietly. "You can't sell it, Kara. You can't even hide it anymore. You need to make it public, make it impossible for anyone to claim it." That thought terrified me, but it also made sense. Secrecy had only brought danger. Maybe exposure was the only way to keep it safe. That night, I sat in my study staring at the radio inside its glass case. The soft reflection of the blue dial shimmered against the glass. It looked peaceful now, almost harmless. I thought about everything it had caused. The break-ins, the fear, the deaths, the revelations. My grandfather had hidden the truth because it wasn't safe in his time. But maybe it could be now. So I made a decision. The next morning, I announced the Hayes Legacy Exhibition, a public unveiling of the radio, the blueprints, and the decrypted files from Project Echo. The Foundation would host it in Marlow Creek's newly restored town museum. The press release went viral overnight. Reporters from every major outlet requested interviews, and historians called it the most significant technological discovery of the post-war era. Amelia helped coordinate the event's security. We had guards, cameras, even government observers. For the first time, I felt like we were no longer hiding in the shadows, we were bringing the truth into the light. The exhibition opened a week later. The hall was packed, scholars, journalists, and curious locals all gathered around the centerpiece. My grandfather's radio. Its once faded wood gleamed under the soft lighting, the dial set permanently to the frequency that had started it all. I stood on the stage, delivering my speech. My grandfather, Robert Hayes, believed that truth doesn't disappear, it just waits for someone brave enough to listen. This radio, once dismissed as junk, carried his voice across time. It reminded me that even silence can hold a secret worth hearing. Applause filled the room. And for a moment, I felt at peace. The laughter and ridicule of the past seemed a lifetime away. The same people who had once rolled their eyes at my old junk were now in awe. After the event, as the crowd dispersed, I lingered near the exhibit. tracing my fingers along the glass. That's when I noticed him. Across the room, standing near the far exit, was a tall figure in a dark coat. The way he stood still, deliberate, watching made my stomach twist. Even through the crowd, I recognized that quiet intensity. Simon. He didn't move toward me. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching me with a faint, knowing smile. Then, as security began ushering people out, he turned and melted into the departing crowd. I wanted to run after him, demand answers, but something held me back. For the first time, I realized that maybe it didn't matter what he wanted anymore. The truth was already out there and it wasn't his to own. Still, a chill ran through me as I looked back at the radio one last time. Its dial flickered faintly, like a heartbeat. And for the first time since I'd heard that haunting song, I wasn't sure if the story was over, or if something or someone was still listening. Our eyes met for a brief moment and then he smiled before disappearing into the night. For a long time after the exhibition ended, I couldn't get that image out of my head, Simon standing in the crowd, watching me as if he knew something I didn't. His faint smile haunted me far more than any threat ever could. It wasn't the smirk of a man who'd lost. It was something else, something that hinted he'd simply moved on to the next game. Security had reviewed the footage later that night, but there was no trace of him, no record of him entering, no shots of him leaving. It was as if he'd never been there at all. Maybe that was intentional. Maybe that was his message. The following days passed quietly, almost too quietly. The exhibition became a nationwide story. Donations poured into the foundation. Historians, journalists, and researchers from around the world reached out, wanting to study my grandfather's documents. The Hayes Echo receiver became a symbol, a reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a voice. Still, some nights, I couldn't sleep. I'd sit in my study with a cup of tea, staring at the framed letter my grandfather had written decades ago. The words, "It holds something far greater than sound," felt truer than ever now. That something wasn't just the coded message or the fortune, it was the faith he'd placed in me to protect it. Eventually, I decided it was time for a new start. I sold my grandfather's old house, the one filled with echoes and memories, and bought a small cottage by the lake just outside of town. It was peaceful there. No more late-night knocks, no more static humming through the walls. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again. But even in peace, the past had a way of whispering back. One rainy evening, I was sitting by the fire, reading through my grandfather's old notes one last time before storing them in the foundation archives. I reached for his silver pen, the one that had come with that mysterious note, and noticed something odd. There were faint markings on the side, almost invisible unless the light hit them just right. Tiny engraved letters, E12R, H, Echo 12 Robert Hayes. A chill ran through me. That was the exact model name written in the blueprints. I couldn't help but wonder if there were more devices out there. More echo receivers hidden in attics, basements, or pawn shops, waiting to be discovered. If my grandfather had built one, who had built the others? And who had them now? I didn't have the answers, and maybe I didn't want them. Some mysteries were better left as they were reminders of the courage it takes to protect the truth. Months later, the foundation held a second exhibition in Washington, D.C. The radio was now encased in reinforced glass, surrounded by historical documents and security that would have made my grandfather laugh. I stood on stage again, thanking the guests for honoring his work. As I spoke, I felt a quiet pride settle in my chest, not for the fame, but for the legacy he'd left behind. After the speech, I walked through the gallery alone. The lights dimmed. The visitors gone. I paused in front of the radio's case, resting my hand against the glass. "Thank you," I whispered, "for trusting me." Outside, the city lights flickered against the night sky. I turned to leave, and for a moment, just a moment, I could have sworn I heard something faint behind me. A single note of music, soft, familiar. I turned back, but the room was silent. The radio sat dark, the dial lifeless. Still, the echo of that note lingered in the air, wrapping around me like a memory. I smiled through the tears that suddenly filled my eyes. "Hello again, Grandpa," I whispered. Back home, I framed a photograph of the radio and hung it above my desk. Beside his letter. Life slowly returned to normal meetings, interviews, quiet evenings by the lake. But sometimes, in the deep stillness of night, when the wind brushed against the windows and the world went quiet, I'd hear the faintest crackle in the air. And then, softly, just barely audible, that same haunting melody. It never scared me anymore. It felt like a promise, a reminder that truth, once found, never really fades. And that somewhere, somehow, the radio still played on,